Hi, Jay.
What's up?
Hi, sir. Sorry, I guess I said your name. Thanks for having me
No,
on
you
here.
can say it at the beginning. I don't care. But if you're like, Jay, bro, what's the problem, bro? Jay. No, that is annoying. Go ahead.
I get that. I guess we're off to a good start. I'm sorry you're feeling poorly. I hope you feel better.
Well, this is all to your advantage. You can destroy me now because I feel like garbage.
Well, I doubt very much I'll be able to do that. But yeah, I'll give it a shot. So I was, and thanks again for tagging me on your live stream a few days ago.
Well, you had to leave earlier, so I wanted you to have a chance to come back and finish your questions or your comments.
Yeah, well, that was nice. Yeah, my baby was kind of having a meltdown, so had to, that took precedence for sure. But yeah, no, we definitely got into the weeds on historical details, et cetera, and that's definitely not where I wanted to go, just because obviously you're way more knowledgeable about that than I am, doing these streams all the time, and you're definitely way more knowledgeable, so I won't advance any arguments with you on that front.
Okay.
I'll just say, so I'm, for the listeners, I'm a Roman Catholic. I'm a convert, actually, from atheism. Well, I think I always kind of believed when I was younger, but I just kind of convinced myself I didn't, so make of that what you will. But yeah, the reason why I don't want to get into the historical minutiae is just it feels sometimes when I hear those streams a little bit of Gnosticism sneaking into it. I just don't think God would expect us to know all these historical minutiae to understand what the true faith is. Do you feel me?
Yeah, I would agree that knowing the essence of knowing the true faith and being orthodox, quote unquote, in the truest sense, is not about having a PhD or a THD. I agree with that. Cool,
yeah. So I would like to advance two arguments then on moral grounds, if you will. So the first I'm calling hierarchy is good, and the second I'm calling trad is bad, actually. And that might be triggering to some people in your audience. But yeah, here we go. So first off, I think hierarchy is good. I think it's observed all throughout nature. I think God made man to kind of subdue the earth and bring it to heel. And the top of that hierarchy is obviously man. We just see this everywhere, these three emergence of hierarchy. So I think it stands to reason that God would create a hierarchy in his own church. I understand the Orthodox position is that Jesus Christ is the head of the Orthodox Church, and I totally get that. But I mean more of an administrative head, in the same way that God delegated man to be the administrative head of the household. Obviously Jesus is the head, spiritual head of any household, but in matters of administration, it's always the man that's the head. And the reason for that being is that if you have both the man and the woman on equal footing in terms of decision making, and there's not one final say, then you get a lot of divorce. And, kind of the church analogy to divorce is schism. And what I see in the Orthodox world is, or I think Americans say schism. So schism on schism. And coming from a single parent home, it's, this is kind of I guess you'll call it an appeal to emotion. But to me, that is the worst thing ever, divorce. And so it's not really a surprise to me then that the Orthodox Church doesn't seem to take as strong of a stand on divorce, which, just given my personal biases, is a really hard thing to get around. But yeah, so with the fact that the Catholic Church has the Pope, I like that. That makes sense to me. given the question of hierarchy. And then, like, further to that, I think kind of a weakness on the Orthodox side, maybe I misunderstand too, I leave that open to be a possibility, but because of this papal office, if you reject the papal office, you're no longer Catholic. However, it seems to me to be in the Orthodox world that if you, like, the Greek Orthodox Church is still considered Orthodox, so is the Roman Catholic Church, Roman Russian Orthodox Church, and those respective churches would each consider themselves Orthodox, just in schism with each other. But because you have this, by the very paradigm of the papal authority in the Catholic Church, if you deviate from that authority, you are no longer Catholic. Therefore, there is only ever one Catholic Church. And again, we were talking about, I don't think you need a PhD to recognize what the true faith is. And it would make sense to me that then there would only be one. So that's what I'm kind of the basis of my hierarchy is good argument. And then we'll go to the trad is bad actually argument. So I think there's been this online movement in recent years. I'm calling it the trad wars. I definitely think Orthodoxy wins this battle. I think that people that kind of fall into the SSPX, the sedevacantist rabbit hole, if you're going to go that route, you definitely, Orthodoxy is the best option. I think it's just the most logically consistent. And I think you do a really good job about taking apart the SSPXers and the sedevacantists for sure. I would just maybe caution people on even going down that route. And I think the error is basically this, that people are looking for the next based thing. And in essence, I think it stems from a certain embarrassment on the part of the adherent by some aspect of the church, which ironically is actually the same mistake that liberals make. They're kind of embarrassed by some dimension of the church. They try and kind of massage it to fit what they want it to be. And, that's not a good thing. So I would caution people, not necessarily accusing you of that, but if anybody, I have seen this, people are not really looking for the truth. They're just looking for the next based thing. And I think that liberals, collapsing this into the political sphere for a second, which I hate doing, but just give me a second on that. I think liberal-minded people tend to have this real strong hunger for looking for a place. This is why I think globalism in a way took off, because they're always just wanderlusting and looking for that place. But I think, as conservative-minded people have this tendency to look for a time, look back in history and think, no, this is when they had it right. No, this is when the rupture started to happen. No, this is rupture started to happen. No, this is when, prior to this thing, then everything was good. And I think that both those desires are actually people ultimately yearning for heaven, because heaven is a place, a literal place, but it's also a time. It's a place we hopefully go to when we die. So it's a point in time, potentially, and it's also a place. And so I think that each person should be understanding of their own biases. Us conservative-minded people have this tendency to get into a purity spiral. And I think that in large part is what the trad movement online is. And I don't think it's actually a good thing. So yeah, those are my two arguments. Hierarchy is good, trad is bad.
All right, let's start with the first point. So while it's true that we can't assume or expect that the way to identify the true church is to have a PhD, there are a lot of instances where we see the church, for example, reduced in numbers to where we could only sort of figure out which one is the right one based on correct theology. And there have been times where even the papacy failed to be clear when, for example, we have the situation of the Fifth Council and Pope Vigilius, or we have the situation of Honorius at the Sixth Council with his failure to teach correct theology. So in the 4th century, for example, when the majority of the church was Arian or semi-Arian, how is it going to be the case that we identify the true church on the basis of simplistic appeals when precisely what's dividing the Catholic, quote unquote, Christianity throughout the Roman Empire is something that's very theologically precise, like the question of homoousios or homoousios. So, do you see what I'm saying? That it sounds good from the outside, maybe, to make this argument that, well, we can just pick a thing like the papacy and that office, and that makes it automatically easy to identify which is the true church. But
yeah,
it's not getting a PhD or requiring a PhD or a THD in history or historical theology to say, but wait a minute, there have been periods when the church was severely reduced in numbers, and even the Roman See failed to do, even on your view, what was its duty. So how in those situations or in those cases or in those times was anyone supposed to recognize what the true church was?
Well, I mean, I think what you're saying is actually a bit of a matter of opinion, right? I mean, you're kind of saying that as fact. Like,
hold on. So are you saying that it wasn't the case that the Catholics were reduced? Hold on. So is it not the case? Because I can read you Athanasius's letter where he says that the heretics have all the buildings, but we have the faith. And he's talking about it being a small number of us. So is that not true?
Well, I mean, okay, so I guess my question here would be, have you ever, like talking about these historical minutiae, has a Catholic ever said to you,
whoa, hold on. You're saying it's a minutia. Why are you calling that a minutia when I'm giving you one of the most famous instances of the church undergoing its first gigantic doctrinal crisis and being reduced in numbers? How is that an issue of minutia? It's like the most famous controversy in the first 1,000 years.
Okay, yeah, sure. So maybe that was a poor choice of words. I was just more saying, like, as we've spoken in the beginning, like all historical details coming together as one, and just, kind of decoding the secrets of the past. It tends to feel a little Gnostic to me. And what I would say is that the reason I'm sure that I don't know what all the Catholic arguments to those particular instances you would bring up would be, but I would just say that I would be more prone to believe those over what you're telling me because of the overall paradigm of the Catholic Church advanced in those two initial arguments. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but the arguments that you gave, I'm giving counter factual evidences and counterfactual events. And so you're saying that, yeah, but what I said was the case. You see, so that's not an adequate way to deal with what I'm saying. So, for example, Athanasius's letter 29 from the year 357 says that it has come down to you as the apostolic faith. They have cut us off. We may not have the buildings, right? And this is a famous point that a lot of traditional Catholics make. He says that we have the faith, but they have the buildings. Okay, and that's because he says they are cast out, even though they have the buildings, they have the numbers, but we have what is the proper faith. So how is that not arguing a Gnostic position in your view?
Well, I'm not exactly sure, and like I said at the outset, I'm not even totally familiar with what you're talking about. But I guess
hold on. But I'm talking about the most famous incident in the first 1,000 years of theological crisis. It's called the Arian crisis. You're not familiar with that?
No, I'm familiar with the Arian crisis.
Okay.
Yes, I'm not familiar with the document you just spoke about.
Okay, so at one point though, it got to be so extreme that almost the entirety of the empire had caved to this, such that Athanasius and a handful of bishops were the only ones left.
Right.
So would therefore that require that the way that we recognize the true church be Gnostic?
The way that I'm not sure what your argument is here. You're saying that because the church...
No, I'm saying that what you said that when I made these points, you said it sounds Gnostic because we ought to be able to just pick out the visible papal big number structure, right?
Oh, no. I'm not saying that the Roman Catholic Church is the right church because it has the most adherents. Definitely not.
No, but that's part of it, is that it's going to be easy. It's going to be visibly recognizable, and the papacy gives us that. Now, I'm pointing out that the papacy also failed in the Arian crisis to be fully clear on orthodoxy.
Okay, well, I'm not actually saying that, though. I'm not saying that just because, like, it has the most numbers, it's the most visible, it's the correct one.
Okay, so then explain to me what you're saying is Gnostic, because you said that it sounds kind of Gnostic to make it a thing where you have to figure out the right theology. How else could one navigate the Arian crisis if it wasn't
what I'm saying is kind of, like, going back through history and being like, well, if this document was interpreted this way and if this meant this, then that this couldn't have been the true faith, and like I see what you're saying, and I definitely agree that there's certainly like, I'm making an argument that we should just ignore history and choose the church that has, like, the most visibility. I think that would be silly. But what I am saying is that like we both agreed on, I don't think that God would require us to have a PhD to understand what the right church would be. I think we can use kind of natural reason and then look back through history. And the way I do it, and maybe this is wrong.
Okay,
like,
so how would a person
proven wrong? But
in your view, how would a person in the 4th century recognize the true church during this crisis?
How would a person during the Arian crisis?
Right.
Well, I don't know. That's a good question. I haven't really thought
because
about
the
that.
argument was that the papacy is what helps us to identify the true church. I mean, is that not the argument you're making?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's true.
So if in the first 3 centuries, when very few churches had access to the Church of Rome or knew what the heck the Church of Rome was doing, how is anybody supposed to know or to base their correct church theology or church choice on the basis of what Rome is doing? So there's been no ecumenical councils. How did anybody in the year 300 know what the true church was?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's
so
why.
Hold on. But it sounds to me like actually the position that you have is the one that's actually more Gnostic, because you're saying that they would just sort of know, sort of by osmosis, people who are unlettered and unable to read, what is going on 1,000 miles away in the Church of Rome?
Well, no, I think that they would look to their respective authorities, and then those authorities would direct them, and obviously, like. So
hold on. Yeah, so do you think? Okay, so do you think that bishops in the 2nd and 3rd and 4th century before the Council of Nicaea, that they were all explicitly Vatican I Roman Catholics? Do you think they had that view?
I don't know what their view was, but I
well, wait a minute. So how do you know that it was the Roman Catholic theology that was the case throughout this time period?
I imagine people at that time asked their bishops what to do, and the bishops referred to bishops that were referring to Rome. That's what I imagine happened. I think it's one of those Occam razor situations where the
okay. So, we can read all these people, right? Like, we can read all of the people from this time period, like Cyprian and like Ambrose and like, Irenaeus and Ignatius and all these people. Do you think that when people were converted, or when there's catechesis that we can read from this period, do you think they all just said, we're the true church because we're the ones that are in communion with Rome?
No, but I think they probably were, wanting to be a part of the church. We're asking, well, where's the authority of the church? Who do I refer to?
So do you think that the main reason or way that people were converted was a question of, how do I know who the authority in the church is? And if you convince me of some visible juridical authority, I'll convert to your religion. If that's the case, then why is it that we have 7 centuries of patristic church father writings and nobody does apologetics that way? Nobody is trying to prove the true church and the true religion on the basis of the papacy. How could John of Damascus in the 700s, when he writes his On the Orthodox Faith, he's writing about the totality of what the entire Catholic faith is in his most famous systematic theology, right? On the Orthodox Faith. It's the first big systematic theology. And he has absolutely no mention of Peter, of Rome, or the papacy. How is that even conceivable, on your view?
Well, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I haven't read that book, but I suspect before like the office was formalized, it didn't mean that people at the time didn't believe that the authority of the church was in Rome.
Well, hold on, the office was formalized. Do you think that the office of the papacy wasn't formalized by the 7th century? That's totally contrary to Roman Catholic theology.
No, I understand that there are certain particularities that were crystallized in the First Vatican Council, which I know you take umbrage with, about indefectibility and whatnot. So I guess what I would say is, and again, like I said, I can't tangle with you on these issues because you're obvious.
Well, and I'm not trying to just one up you. My point is that I understand the argument that you're making about authority seems to trump all this historical stuff. But the problem is that the papacy is not an abstract, like it's not just abstract authority principle. It's an actual historical entity that has existed in a city, right?
Right.
Okay.
No, and that's what I think is kind of, well, it's almost analogous to our faith overall, where it's not just, like the Grecian reason logos, but it's also all of that incarnate in a person, in Jesus Christ. So you're right in the sense that historicity matters because it's a story we're all living through.
Okay, so let's move.
The natural reason also does matter because they need to be married in the structure.
Okay, but natural reason in Satis Cognitum, for example, tells you that if you want to know if the papacy is true, you go back and you read and you look through all the documents that I'm talking about, right? That's what Satis Cognitum.
When I said you have your opinion about those documents, and obviously the Orthodox in general have their opinion about those documents, but the Catholic Church has their opinion about those documents as well.
Okay, but hold on. So
I would be liable to believe the Catholic side because I see the necessity of the paradigm through natural reason.
But how does natural reasoning give you the necessity of the papal paradigm when in the papal paradigm, it's the scriptures that vindicate the papacy, and we know the correct scriptures in your view because of the papacy? So that to me is a circular argument. It's not a argument based on natural reasoning.
I don't see where the circle is.
So Roman Catholic theology argues that the reason and the way that we know that the papacy is true is Matthew 16. The way that we know that Matthew is supposed to be in the Bible is because of the decision of the papacy on the canon, right? That's the classic Roman Catholic view of where the canon of Scripture comes from, right?
Okay, well that is circular. So
right.
I mean, if that's true, what you're saying or the way you're saying it, I would find that pretty unbelievable.
So then that's not an approach to things in a natural theology way or a natural reasoning way. So natural reasoning, according to Satis Cognitum, is telling you as an individual to go and study all of these documents that I'm talking about from church history and from the church fathers, and you will come to the conclusion of the papacy, it says.
Okay, well, that's not really my argument, though. My argument was that I am liable to believe, like, this is what I said at the beginning, hierarchy is good, actually. And just given all of the...
Okay. Do you think there's a self-evident idea of what hierarchy is such that it automatically makes the papacy true?
Well, I think within the context of Christianity, sort of. I wouldn't say it exactly how you're saying it.
Okay, well then let's say this. Why isn't it then the case that in the first 7 councils, for example, that wouldn't it be, if what you're saying is the case, then wouldn't it be the case that the councils are really just adjuncts of the papacy? Why would you have councils where people investigate the writings of the popes to see if they're Orthodox? It would be the other way around. You would have rather the Pope asking all of the theologians in the world what their view is, and then he signs off on a final document. But that is not conciliarism. In fact, it's not until the Lateran Council of 649 that the Pope first tries to call a council and make it his own council with his own seal of approval. And
okay, so I hear that you're like really wanting to go back to this historical stuff, and I don't blame
there's
you.
no bypassing history.
Knowledgeable,
There's no bypassing that from abstractions of what you think ought to be. In other words, if you're if what you're saying is the case, then there wouldn't have been ecumenical councils. Everyone would have just written to the Pope, because that would de facto be the best approach. That's your argument. Why didn't it shake out that way?
What I'm saying is that we look all throughout nature, we see hierarchy. We see it.
Okay, so why then wasn't this done in then why wasn't that done in the first 7 councils?
Well, this is where I believe that development of doctrine is important. And actually, it brings us to my second argument, trad is bad, actually, which we haven't gotten to. But also, I don't want to sound like I'm running, but I want to be cognizant that there are other people that might want to speak. Maybe we can get to trad is bad next time.
So actually now you're saying that it's development of doctrine that backs up this argument that this is how the papacy ought to be run. So the church didn't know this. So why isn't the faith once for all given to the saints good enough? Like why wasn't this good enough, this pre-papal church? Because you're essentially admitting that the proper papal church wasn't the case for these first 7 centuries, which is a concession to my point. If you're admitting development, that it had to get to this, then you're admitting that so the church of the first 1,000 years wasn't papal. That's a tremendous admission.
Well, I think you said 700, and no, I've never said that. In fact, that was part of my second argument that trad is bad. Is that development of doctrine is necessary. I think that the depending on the issues of the day, and that's why our religion is historical. You're not wrong in pointing that out. Our religion is a story, a historical story, but it is also a person, and it is also an event, but it is also the marriage of reason. So it's all those things coming together. So I don't blame you. Like, you're not.
Yeah, but do you understand that this is the basis for how? Okay, but this is what you're saying. What you're saying is the basis for how it's now okay to have interfaith, interreligious gatherings, and in 1928 it was apostasy. The basis, your idea of developing theology, morals, and doctrine is the basis for all of what those people are saying.
No, so
yes, it is. What do you mean, no?
Well, I'm just about to say. What I think is that the development is so there's obviously hard boundaries given dogma, but that depending on
so the papacy is not dogma?
Sorry, just let me finish. As we're moving through time,
my space just shut off. That's not fair.